founders who begin brand first don't end up very well. In my personal view, I don't think they become long-term legends that we all look up to. You have to build something of value and you leave a mark before you can become a brand. Similarly, to build a great product first, you have to impact a certain number of people positively before you can actually qualify for becoming a brand.
What is so unique about Ogilvy, Hindustan Unilever, and Sequoia Capital that they have stayed market relevant and built and enabled iconic brands? How Don Valentine, the father of venture capital and the founder of Sequoia, built a generational brand. If brands and brand building intrigue you, listen on. My next guest on the 1% Project is a brand builder, a voracious reader, and an eternal optimist, Raja Ganapathy. Raja spent his conceptual years learning the ropes of marketing at Ogilvy on accounts such as Hindustan Unilever, and his defining stint was as the chief marketing officer at Sequoia Capital India. At Sequoia, Raja worked with industry-defying founders of Byju's, Freecharge, Healthkart, and many more. Today, Raja is the founding partner at Spring Marketing Capital, a skin in the game marketing value added investment firm that builds the brands of tomorrow. Listen in to learn how Raja navigated through his career from Ogilvy to Spring. What is the new world order of marketing? How to build brands? Are Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, and Kunal Shah brands of founders, and much more? Subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to it and sign up to the 1% Project's Think newsletter at 1%.live, which brings highly curated content that adds value to your professional and personal development. We kick the conversation off by asking Raja how he reflects on his career. There were some challenges with the camera on my end, so I apologize for the choppy video.
I think you begin with possibly the most difficult question. Typically, host, you're supposed to ask simple questions first. You actually given me a very challenging question for the simple reason that it's very difficult sitting from where I am to actually make sense of my career. Taken multiple U-turns. The easiest way I can explain it is that every time I got comfortable at work or in my job, I chucked it and found the source of discomfort. That doesn't make any sense, but that's why I said it's a challenging question. I spent 10 years in advertising. Then I spent 3 years in a bank, which was launching retail in India, and I was a CMO there. And then I spent 10.5 years in a legendary venture capital firm. And I think those U-turns, very difficult to explain those U-turns from here. But what I can tell you is almost 24 years of all of that career actually ended up culminating in a entrepreneurial journey for me right now at Spring, where I feel that everything's just come together. If I look back, I can almost find a reason why I began in advertising. I can think of where the banking experience helped me. I can think of where the Sequoia experience obviously helped me. Thing where I'm sitting now, it all seems to make sense. It's all come together very beautifully. I look back and I say that different parts of my experience on communication, marketing, on venture capital, on banking, on startups, on launches. All of that has culminated in what I do today, which is work with founders, help them build brands, and invest in the best of them. So it's all come together very well in a very strange way. If you ask me for one word in my career, I would possibly say serendipity.
Brilliant. You went from Ogilvy to Deutsche, then to Sequoia, and now obviously Spring Capital. What were your building blocks when you kicked off your career in Ogilvy?
Super lucky in Ogilvy when I joined. It's really strange. I ended up, two of us who were selected in Ogilvy. The same time, we both joined in summer. I was from not a fancy MBA college. The other person was from one of the IIMs. And he was supposed to work on levers because all the lever brand managers and marketing managers were ex-IIM. And he was selected for that purpose. I ended up joining a month earlier. As chance would have it, one of the account managers at our end was desperate to have an assistant. And she insisted that I work with her. And so, because I joined a month early, I was almost shoved into the levers business. It was like a trial period. She was probably saying, hey, work for a month and we'll figure it out. Deep down, I knew that 1 month is possibly going to change my life. And that's exactly what happened. There was a launch happening that month. So I just got very well integrated with the levers team. That first 5 years that I spent in Ogilvy working on levers, part of an amazing team. Worked on Ponds and Vaseline, and that was really the building blocks. Learned marketing during this stint. Levers has and always will be, I think, a university for brands and marketing. And I was super lucky. I was not even supposed to do that job. So very, very lucky to have gotten through the back door And best thing I can say for myself is it hung on like a limpet, made the best of my chance. It was a great experience to learn everything on brand and marketing. We were part of a team that was almost like shadow brand managers. So we used to end up being part of the packaging team when new packaging was being developed, being part of the research team when new cutting edge consumer research was being created, part of launches, part of marketing communication creation, part of market visits, part of launches with sales teams. Ended up seeing the entire gamut. Fabulous education. And that really, if you ask me, was the major building block of everything that happened since then.
You brought up levers, and this week I just released a mini episode on the CEO Factory by Sudhir Sidapati,
Oh,
which
lovely.
is basically the marketing and management lessons from Hindustan Unilever. It's brilliant. Everything in that book is counterintuitive.
Yeah, I can imagine because I have got to know Sudhir professionally and he's just an amazing guy. I hope to do more work with him in the future, but he's just amazing in his perspectives, in his learnings, what he brings to life. I didn't meet him at the point that I worked on levers, but I ended up meeting him much later.
How or what is the new world order of marketing? What has changed? And how has the industry changed?
That's a great question. Truth, if you ask me, and I'm going to be super honest, having spent almost 3 decades, sounds scary. A lot of your listeners are going to switch off the minute I say that, the young ones. But take the last 30 years in marketing. I think everything has changed, and what has really changed is the consumer. The consumer has changed, the consumer has evolved. The way the consumer accesses brands, discovers brands has changed. The way the consumer consumes content has changed. The aspiration, desires of consumers have changed. And the sad reality is we as marketers are lagging behind. I think so. What has changed is the consumer, what has not changed is marketing thinking. So while the fundamentals of marketing still hold good, right? I mean, even today, I'm sure in an IIM or any MBA class, there's Philip Kotler being to teach the fundamentals of marketing. I think that doesn't need to change. Like in any discipline, the core fundamentals remain the same. But the application of those fundamentals and application of those rules has dramatically changed. But unfortunately, as an industry, the marketing industry hasn't kept in touch. They have not innovated enough. They have not managed to convert young people working there to becoming leaders. I always joke saying when I see a marketing company from my days, from 90s, and I see that the people heading that company are the same people that were heading it when I was working in marketing. And I'm saying, hey, that's not on. By now, some of them should have taken on chairman roles and moved back. You need a new breed of leaders. You need people who understand. For example, for many years, there was this person who used to feel very proud that he's never used a smartphone or never used a credit card. And now you're helping founders and large companies create brands and helping them create communication. But if you do not know how the youth are managing, how the youth are using new media, you've never been on Instagram, you don't know what Snap means. I somehow come from a world where you have to be in touch with the youth. You have to find ways to do it. Even as you get older, you have to find an in into the world of today. It's not just about the youth. Even consumers in various age segments, even the older age segment, are changing. I mean, there is hardly a 40, 50-year-old today who doesn't use a smartphone or who doesn't use social media. And unless you are in keeping with those times, unless you know the lingo of the day, unless you know how they consume content, unless you are clear about the products and services they use, I just feel that you will be stuck with the fundamentals and you wouldn't have evolved. And I think it's happened. And it's also reflective of the business models in that industry. They have not evolved at all. And that's part of the reason we launched Spring. We felt like there is this huge gap and nobody in this industry is actually addressing that gap. It's right time, right place for us. But I do hope that many more people step up because I think this opportunity exists. There are some very smart people there, so don't get me wrong. There's a lot of very smart, intelligent talent available in the marketing industry. But most of them are getting stifled because they're working in companies that have not evolved, that have not innovated, that have not kept in pace with the consumer.
I do feel that the hypothesis that you have of how the transition has happened, on that hypothesis, you've built Spring Capital. So let's talk about Spring Capital, break that down and double click on that.
My experience actually began with Sequoia on this front. Again, Sequoia is an amazing platform. I was pretty privileged to spend 10 years there. And my 10 years were spent as during the seminal years of venture capital in India. I joined Sequoia in 2008. People didn't even know what venture capital was. And the consumer tech ecosystem that we see today did not exist. UPI did not exist. Geo did not exist. Smartphones were not as penetrated as they are today. I mean, a sea change. And I was super lucky to have got a front row seat to that change. I ended up working with lots of smart founders. A lot of my initial years were spent evangelizing marketing and brand, why you should do it. I think today's founder is a super smart person. He or she knows exactly what they're doing. They know the capabilities they have, and they know the capabilities they don't have. It's less, this role is now less evangelical because I think everybody understands that there is a gap. There are founders who have done this before, who have experience in building consumer brands. But the majority of founders who are operating in the space today do not have that experience. And I think maybe it's a surprise, but 90% of the work we do it for brands, both on the investment side and the consulting side. It's all inbound. It's either inbound or a reference. It's people who seek us out and say, hey, we want to talk to you. Doing something here and we think we can become partners. So you know this practice in the marketing industry or the advertising industry of pitching, right? Speculative pitching. It's a terrible practice. It's one of the reasons why the industry, I said, has not evolved. By, anecdotal accounts, 35% of a agency's time actually goes on working on speculative pitches. That's not remunerative. That's not compensating their core business. And it's also in some ways demeaning, like a swayamvar of ideas without even being contracted. In the last 4 years of Spring on the consulting side, we've never pitched even once. We've never participated in any pitch. There are companies which normally select their marketing partners through a pitch who have changed that process for our sake. So I do feel that, I think the mindset has changed. I think more founders are realizing the value of building a brand. They understand where they need that support and capabilities. And like I said, founders are smart. They want to build a successful business and will do whatever it takes to make that happen. That's a very long introduction, but for us, Spring Marketing Capital came up because we sensed a gap. We sensed a gap where founders who are raising capital, smart people, they have found a problem to solve. They're approaching it with an innovative mindset. We felt needed the expertise of a marketing partner. Part of the reason was what I already spoke about, the marketing industry. So I leave that be. But the rest of the reason was that we also believe that we have the right ammunition for it. Again, I must confess that I got super lucky in having two founders. So Arun Iyer was the chairman and chief creative officer of Lintas, 16 years in that firm. 20 years overall in advertising. And if you have spent the last 10 or 15 years in India, you have seen his campaigns, you have seen his brands. And I think the work that he did, even today, is used as case studies by many, many companies. So Arun came on board as a creative, as our head of creative and my co-founder. Vineet is very different from both of us. He built 22 Feet, which became the pioneering digital marketing agency in India. He sold that to the Omnicom group. He became CEO of the acquiring entity. And he brings a very strong digital first focus. And I believe that the combination of what three of us have to offer, me coming from business strategy and marketing, Arun coming from creative, Vineet from a digital first approach, I think this is what is required for brands of tomorrow. And we've tried to create a team that kind of mirrors us and actually builds on our capabilities and takes it further. And we have a 40-member consulting team today. And I'm actually very proud of that team and what it manages to do for the brands it works with. And I think once we sense that is really where we build Spring. So Spring, if you look at our ambition or our vision, if 20 years down the line, you pull out the best consumer brands from India, homegrown brands, we want to be investors in many of them. We want to do it across stages. I think we are in early stages of that journey. We are in year 5. So we have two models. We have a consulting business, which is independent, where we take on a few assignments for retainers and projects. Typically on the consulting side, we end up working with large companies like Byju, Tata 1mg, Wakefit, which have all grown reasonably in size. On the investment fund, we have one fund which is currently operational. It's a 150 crore fund. We typically invest at Series A, Series B. We offer our marketing expertise and experience as part of that investment. We usually co-invest all the VCP firms operational in India on the consumer side. And we believe that our combination of capital and expertise is what makes us attractive to the companies that accept our capital. So that's the two models. Going forward, I continue building on these two streams. Consulting firm is at the heart of everything we do. That's what provides the expertise and experience that the founders value. I think by the end of this year, we will have two different funds. The current one, which invests from Series A to Series B, and the new fund, which will aim to invest seed to pre-Series A. The new fund is still very early days. I can't speak about it too much. There are regulatory reasons that govern what I can say, but this much I can say that our aim in the new fund will be to invest at founders at much earlier stage, because we believe that using an advisory platform can actually power and accelerate growth in consumer companies. But the last point I have to make is that I've been super lucky and privileged. My experience at Sequoia, all the work that Arun and Vineet have done in the last 10 to 15 years, plus the last 4 years of Spring, where we have probably touched 50 plus D2C companies. I think gives us a unique ability to connect the dots, which I think will get strengthened as we go forward. And that's what we are betting on. The power of the Indian consumer is growing. We are reading about it every day. Everybody's talking about it. That's exactly the bet we have placed, that in the next 10 to 20 years, this spending consumer will drive the growth of a lot of homegrown brands in existing spaces as well as new spaces. And we want to make sure that we are around, support those efforts, and be a part of the captive.
Two things that actually come from your own experience and from your response. One is Sequoia as a brand is a generational brand. Very few people, even in the venture capital space, probably know who the founder of Sequoia is. And the reason being is that it's not around the founder, but it's a generational brand because it has been built around the work that it has done. And the second part is actually from the CEO Factory, where Sudhir says that a great brand is not the one which is recognized when you see the logo, but is the one which you recognize without seeing the logo. That is where the power of brand marketing sits, and probably that evolution has happened in the consumer's mind. And everybody has to actually get on with that mindset and probably look how you're looking at the marketing industry.
I think I just want to respond to what you just said. It's a very, very valid point. I think Sequoia's right from day one was very clear that they were building an institution. The founder of Sequoia is Don Valentine. He was an amazing guy. He's inspired many generations of founders. The people who came after him, Mike Moritz, Doug Leone, are all legends in their own right. But what is amazing is that they've always placed the firm and the brand above them, and this desire to build an institution that outlasts them, what kind of differentiates Sequoia from a lot of other named firms. In many ways, at least personally, I've taken a lot of inspiration from that journey and from that thinking. If you ask me what I would like to be in 20 years from now, 20 years from now, I'd like to drive past Spring and tell somebody proudly that, you know what, I was part of that founding team. And I would like the institution and the idea of what we have built. If we're doing at Spring is super unique. Nobody has done this anywhere in the world, to use a brand marketing first approach towards investing. No one's really done this. If we are successful, I hope that we will inspire a lot more people to take up value add investing as a model. But definitely, at least my dream is that the current founders of Spring, irrespective of when they move or when they decide to move on from active work, I mean, we would like the institution of Spring to remain and become much, much stronger than where we left it.
So that brings me to ask Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Kunal Shah, are they brands or are they founders first?
I know Kunal personally, so I can answer for it. And Elon and Steve Jobs, I've obviously read a lot about. Interestingly, I've in the last 50 pages of a book called Founders, which is on Elon, Peter Thiel, and Mark Levikin, the PayPal founders, and the story of their amazing company. So all of that is very fresh in my mind. I think they're founders first. If you ask Kunal today, if you ask him to choose what he is today, what he wants to be tomorrow, he will say founder. That's the role that they all relish. If you look at Elon Musk, sold his first company, made some 20 million. Then when PayPal listed, he made some 100 million. He's on record saying, he took the first 20 million, put it into PayPal. He took the next 100 million, put in Tesla and the space company. As far back as 2000, 2002, he was speaking about going to space. This is a visionary. If you look at Steve Jobs, all of them were founders first. The truth is, I think they're all smart people who also know that to be a successful founder, you also have to be a brand. So I think the brand bit comes afterwards. You're a founder first. You first build a successful business, create value. Then you use that to become a brand, because then through that, you can actually become a bigger founder. So I think these are all founders for life, right? If you look at all of them, Kunal is on a second venture. He's always dreaming up ideas. He's always restless. He can never be at peace. That's a true founder. Same goes for Elon Musk, from what we know of him from the outside. And I think it's a very interesting question you asked, because actually, if I look at it, I think that's our view of how brands are built as well. First, you build a great product. On the back of that product, you build a business, and then you build a brand. This might sound a little strange coming from a branding person, but I always feel there is a right time for you to start building a brand. You don't begin brand first. Founders who begin brand first don't end up very well. In my personal view, I don't think they become long-term legends that we all look up to. Have to build something of value, and you leave a mark before you can become a brand. Similarly, to build a great product first, you have to impact a certain number of people positively before you can actually qualify for becoming a brand.
You also said that For today's brand, an emotional quotient is not good enough. An emotional appeal is just not good enough. Can you double click on that?
A little bit of fundamental marketing think, which I have tested through a lot of years of experience, made enough mistakes to actually realize that just thinking that brand can be pure emotion, I think it's wrong. A brand is, according to me, a combination, call it the triangulation of arriving at a proposition at spring. And it's a very simple device we use, which is founder's vision, product promise, and the deep consumer insight that you have used. When all of these come together, is when I think we managed to create a springboard, literally call it a springboard for a successful brand. And we have succeeded everywhere. We have managed to actually craft, fine tune, and hone these 3 points. It sounds very simplistic, but it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of craft, and it takes a lot of hard work. To me, I think a brand devoid of a product promise cannot exist. When anybody says, oh, people love this brand and they'll be willing to do anything for it, actually, they also love the product. They find the product super important in their life. This question that we always used to ask and encourage founders to ask is, what happens if your product doesn't exist tomorrow? What's the kind of pain that you will leave in the world behind? That's coming from the strength of your brand will depend on the pain if your product does not exist tomorrow. If you don't exist today and next day, life goes on as it is, it's not a great brand. That's not strong enough. That's not purposeful enough. Even the examples that you gave me, let's take Apple. I think if Apple does not exist tomorrow, millions of us will feel pain, right? Now, is that just emotional pain? That's not true. It's not just emotional pain. These are real products. They play a real role in my life. And I have come to depend on these products. I've come to love them. Of course, there is a design element. Of course, there is an emotional appeal that the brand makes. But emotional appeal is just by itself not enough. I've seen sometimes marketers use the Apple example to justify slightly esoteric and weird brand language. And I completely disagree. Apple always remained very grounded on its products. It was always very clear that the first step began with a great product. Everything else followed. And it's not as if they haven't had failures. But the biggest success of Apple have actually product successes. The brand is a layer on top. Even when we meet early stage founders, they ask us, we tell them, yes, of course, you must think about brand. It's just one element in your mix. And there will come a time in your journey when you start double clicking on the brand and investing behind it. The first step of the journey really is to build a great product, is to build product innovation, is to make a difference to the life of a consumer, is to solve an actual pain point. This is very super cliched and maybe something that comes out of a textbook, but all my experience tells me that this is the right way.
On that, actually, I have built my own definition of a great product. And in my mind, a great product is something that actually makes you dumb, which is Apple. So, what I mean by that is it is so seamless that you don't have to worry about what's happening in the background. On the other hand, if you use a Microsoft product, it is preparing you for doomsday because every other day there is a flicker, there is a virus, there is something that is going on. You need to figure your way around it. Sometimes the mouse is not working, sometimes the projector is not working, something goes around and you need to fix it. A great product has its own pluses. A not so great product also has its pluses, however you want to see it.
No, that's actually true. One of my ex-bosses, Ranjan Kapoor, he was a chairman of Ogilvy. He's an amazing guy, somebody we all used to look up to. We all owe him a lot. Had a really smart theory about brands which have a little bit of a failure point. He used to say that perfect brands actually don't become very successful long term. Brands which have a few warts, which look a little human, which make a few mistakes, are also loved. The example he used to give me earlier on was Royal Enfield when Bullet was launched. The Bullet practitioners used to take a lot of pride in the fact that, there are only some mechanics who can fix the Bullet issues. It was almost a matter of pride for them. It didn't seem like a disadvantage. Or that, you could break your ankle if you get the kick wrong was a good thing for them. They were like, hey, that's great. It excludes all the losers from our club. So I do feel that it cuts both ways. I completely agree with you. It's not just about a perfect product. And that's where the power of a brand comes in, right? If it was just a perfect product, I doubt if Apple could have charged the premium that it charges and it happily pay that premium time and time again. It's a combination of a great product with a phenomenal brand story that's woven around the brand. And once that kicks in, you're willing to forget and forgive some of the problems. Let's take the classic AirPods falling off and, you're losing AirPods issue. I think all of us have taken it in our stride. Right? We seem to make a joke out of it. It's a famous, creates memes. We know it costs us a lot of money, but we're willing to live with it because we also love the brand. That interplay is a little bit difficult to define, but it does exist.
Double click on your thought where you say to a startup that your biggest competitor is actually Google and not your next door neighbor.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, and I think lots of D2C companies are starting to realize it. Unfortunately, some of them after spending a lot of money, is that performance marketing only takes you so far. And all the money that you spent on Google and Meta and so on. I think the challenge there is that I think it's great for getting your product in the hands of the first set of consumers. It's great for trial. It's great for building product love. But at some point of time, you need consumers to start buying into your franchise. And I think the biggest challenge is to, and I think the biggest challenge for companies like us is to get consumers to actually type in the name of the brand in the browser. So don't search for a onion hair shampoo, but search for a particular brand. Don't search for a XYZ face wash, but search for a brand. I think searching for a brand is one of the biggest, getting organic traffic onto a website, getting organic traffic onto Amazon, getting people to actually find your brand in a shell. All of that actually is the crux of brand building. Getting people to tell other people that you should try this new brand, you should try this new product. I think that's really the crux of brand building. And in the absence of that, the customer acquisition cost will just break your back. Because the truth is that the DY by DX on performance marketing will never work out on your favor unless there is organic build up to the brand. And sometimes it can be a little exciting, it can be heady to see a lot of initial sales. But then you also realize, like, I met a big investor today and he said he met a company that has reached 100 crores of revenue and then he realized they spent 110 crores to get there. Now that's unsustainable. This is a huge challenge for India companies in the last 6 months. And hence, that was my point of saying Google is a competitor because Google is going to sell their AdWords to everybody. Then you are in this bidding race, constantly sinking in more and more money to try and get your brand and your product visible. I remember an exercise a VC did once and shared the numbers with me. He said 35% of the money that they had invested in the previous couple of years had actually gone to Google and Meta. And he was telling me how shocked he was when he did the analysis. He's saying, I seem to be a routing mechanism for these large multinational companies, make a lot of profit. So I think that was the point, that the whole purpose of building a brand is actually to build organic traction, whether offline or online. Get consumers to search for you, get consumers to type your name.
Do you see a difference in how a traditional corporation or a corporate looks at marketing versus a Byju's or a Wakefit?
I would just take founder driven brands like a Wakefit, for example, with maybe more traditional legacy companies, which with very large brands. I think the biggest difference is risk taking. The single biggest difference is risk taking. I remember my first ever meeting with some of these founders, and I think they get excited by the concept of taking a risk. They get excited by disruption. They hate the boring. They don't want to do stuff that's been done before. When I used to work with larger companies, a typical question was, has it been done before? In that world, if you say yes, they get reassured. In the new world, if you say yes, they hate it. So I think the ability to take risks, to move fast, to take quick decisions, these are some of the reasons. And like I said, the ability to dream big and have a vision which you use to inspire everybody to work along with you. I think that's where magic comes in. And that's why, to me, I think all of us at Spring have chosen the path of working with founder driven businesses because we enjoy that. We enjoy the speed to market. We enjoy the fixing it forward. We know we're not going to be perfect every time, but we love the idea of experimenting, trying out new things. Wakefit is a great example. Someone in my team, Sandeep Balan, who heads content for us, he had just joined and he came up with this idea randomly of the sleep internship program for Wakefit. And the founder of Wakefit, he loved it. We just said, okay, let's try this out. We carved out a small budget. It sounded insane when we first heard it, which is, can we pay people to sleep? If we are all about sleep, our internship program should actually pay people to sleep. We should reward people for sleep. That's how it began. And I think all great ideas sound a little outrageous at the get go, right? The famous Airbnb example, apparently they walked into the Sequoia office and in the first meeting, they told the Sequoia partners, do you all have a couch in your house that you don't use at all? And they said, yes. So the Airbnb team said, hey, we're going to show you how you can monetize that couch by renting it out to other people. And this one of the Sequoia partners told me, he said, I almost got up and left the room at that point. I found that so crazy. But obviously it evolved and it It became bigger than that original statement. But I think that ability for founders to understand something that's outrageous can actually work. I think just the way boardrooms are designed, right? You don't feel like coming up with an outrageous idea. You feel very stifled. The environment itself doesn't allow you to break out of the box. Now, this is not universally true. Many of the large companies are actually setting up smaller, smarter units. We're working with a very large multinational who's working with us on a couple of projects which are very specific aims, small teams, moving faster. So I think everybody's learning. Similarly, when a company like Wakefit becomes larger, then they need to create a brand code. They have to become a little more systematic. They have to focus on the fundamentals. So I think it's little bit of learning on both sides. It's not black and white. Nevertheless, I think for me personally, I enjoy working with people who are quick to react, take decisions, willing to take risks, willing to try the outrageous, willing to experiment. I think that's what makes the journey exciting.
Brilliant. What is Raja's superpower?
I think that sounds difficult to answer because I don't think I have any, and I'm not being humble. I think actually, again, I think that answer to what makes me tick in at least the limited ways that I tick, I think has changed every 5 years. The truth is, typically in all appraisal forms, you're supposed to write what makes you tick and what's your superpower. In my first 5 years in Ogilvy, I wrote confidence, and I think that was correct. I think it was confidence because at that point I had nothing, no knowledge, I had no experience. The only way I could wing it was with confidence. You show your confidence, people trust you, and then you build on top of that. So that was right. At some point in Sequoia, I remember one of the partners whom I used to work with very closely said, "Your biggest superpower is EQ. You have very high EQ, you have high empathy," and something that he told me. And I said, "Oh, wow, no one's ever said that to me before." But I think superpowers and powers and your core value, core skills, I think they evolve and they should evolve. If I am 25 years of work expert later, 30 years of working, if your superpower remains the same, then I think you've not changed, you've not evolved, you've not learned. I don't know what it is today in these last 5 years. I can ask my partners at Spring and maybe they can give you a better answer. But at least when I was in Sequoia in my last 5 years, I used to think it was EQ.
Three productivity tools.
So I'm actually going to go with slightly offbeat ones, not apps, not organizers. So I think my first productivity tool is walking. I walk a lot. I solve most of my problems while walking. It's really something that I now do for many years. It helps me think. It helps me break problems that sounds massive when I'm sitting at my laptop in my workstation. Suddenly disappears when I'm walking outside in my community. I walk a lot. A lot of my problem solution happens during walking, and I highly recommend it to people who want to get out, who want to find a healthier way to beat stress. I think it's super healthy to spend some time with yourself, also be healthy, and at the same time problem solve. So that's number one. Number two is reading. Grew up in a fairly lower middle class home. I didn't have high exposure, didn't go to a great school. I think what helped me during all my formative years was reading. And I read everything. I read history, I read fantasy, read science fiction. And I think I read mysteries. All of that kind of opened up the world to me. It showed me a world way, way bigger than my little house and what my little school could do. And I think that's something that I've kept very close to my heart all these years. I read a lot. I read everything that I can lay my hands on. I'm fairly non-discriminate. And that's really helped keep my thinking fresh and helped me learn. The third productivity tool, I think, is humility. That's the biggest productivity tool in the world. Because if you're humble, you will learn. I think the ability to get up and say, look, I'm, not as great as I was. And this possibly is also evolution. I didn't used to think like that in my early years, but I think I've, learned that being grounded, staying humble is the best way to evolve, grow, and learn.
That brings me to three books or blogs that have impacted your career and your thinking.
Oh my God, that's super tough because, like I said, I've read a lot. And at various points of time, I think books have influenced my thinking, the way I operate. They've had an impact on how I want to conduct the rest of my life. So I think personally for me, it's almost impossible to pick three books that have been life changing. Maybe if I sit down and think, I may be able to come up with 10 or 20, but three is almost impossible. So let me do one thing. Let me do a cheat answer and let me just tell you the last three books I read. Two of them I would highly recommend. One of them is a book that I actually reread. This is On Leadership, which is by Alex Ferguson and Michael Moritz. It's a book that I went back to because I had some fundamental questions around leadership to some work related stuff. And I think it really helped me. I think the book does a beautiful job. Mike is a fantastic writer himself. And he's done a great job of taking the insights of Alex Ferguson's fantastic career and converting them into leadership lessons. And the beauty is I'm not even interested in football. Book that worked for me in spite of that. The second book is, I mentioned that, the story of PayPal. Again, fascinating. I think it just tells you that companies evolve so much, they pivot so much. I think 20 years is nothing in a lifetime. So I think it also teaches you that near death situations, difficult situations are something that we should all take in our stride. It's amazing what a company like PayPal went through. It's also amazing how you read about these great individuals. And at some many points of time, they made mistakes. They didn't know what they were doing. They went down the wrong path. Their calculations were wrong. I think it's okay. It kind of reassured me that all of us can be eventually successful. And the third book is actually a piece of fiction, which again I found interesting. It's a book called Bear Town, by this author called Frederick Backman. Quite famous, I think. It's about this little town where hockey is everything, and it's happens in the town as a result of a pretty heart wrenching incident that impacts the hockey team. So three very disparate books, but those are the three books I read recently.
Before we close, what advice would you give to your younger self?
The real truth, Pritesh, is I would actually not change anything in my life. I think we are the sum of everything that's happened to us. So I look back at my younger self. I made so many mistakes. I'm ashamed. I'm embarrassed of so many moments. Taken me a long time to even share those moments with my family. I'm like, oh my God, I can't talk about it. So, but I think we are a result of all of those mistakes, all of those failures, all of that successes, all those embarrassing moments. And I just have learned to live with it. And I think as far as we, learn from those moments in our life, and as far as we remember them well, history is the best teacher that we can ever hope for. I would not change a single thing. When I was making those mistakes, when I was behaving badly, I think I felt on top of the world. I would never want to change that. Outcome be damned. And in spite of everything, I'm happy with where I am today. So I would change nothing. And I would actually, it's also a bit of a philosophy that I use with younger people. When I'm asked, what do you advise? My daughter won't listen to a single thing I say. And she shouldn't. All younger people should live life the way they live. They should follow their ideals. I mean, they live in an amazing world today. The opportunities are way more than they were for someone like me. I would say, just chart your own path. Don't listen to people who are older than you. They don't know better, even though we think we do. So, yeah, no advice at all.
Brilliant, Raja. That's a great place to close this conversation. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Pritesh. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. All the best.